over the years heard this rock and roll legend about Guitar Slim, who's an actual guy who was an early electric guitar player in New Orleans. He had a hit in the early 50s with a song called The Things I Used to Do that I believe was arranged by Ray Charles when he was still a teenager. And he was famous for a couple things besides being a really good player. One was that he had a very long extension cord from his amp. And he used to go out on Bourbon Street or wherever he was playing in New Orleans and walk across the street and play in the doorways of the other clubs and do this Pied Piper thing and bring big people back into his club. And the other was that he was known to not show up at his gigs every once in a while, or just book himself more widely than he could actually, go and perform at. So Earl King was the most famous of the guys, and there were probably a half dozen other guys who went out, as Guitar Slim. A club owner would kind of just point at somebody who played guitar and say, well, nobody knows who you are. Learn this song. Tonight, you are Guitar Slim. And in those days, before there were rock videos or television or album covers, people didn't know what you looked like. You were just a name next to a song on a jukebox roll. So I wrote a story in 1993, short story in 1993, called Keeping Time. That's in my story collection, Dillinger in Hollywood. That at the time was a contemporary story of a 40-year-old drummer in a 20-year-old band, and at some point, this old janitor comes over to him who has hands crippled by arthritis, and he says, well, you wouldn't know it to look at me now, but I used to be Guitar Slim, one of the original Guitar Slims. And I over the years, started thinking about it would be cool to make a story or a movie about that guy when he was young, because he tells some stories in the course of the short story. And then I started doing a little research about the era, mostly listening to music. I had come up in the 50s just listening to mainstream rock and roll, and that eventually led me to blues and gospel, partly because we used to visit relatives in the South, and the radio got a lot better after Baltimore, Maryland. All of a sudden you got these stations for maybe 50 miles, maybe 100 at the most, that had much rawer stuff, blues and gospel and country western stuff that you just didn't hear on the top 40 stuff up north.
I know a gal by the name of Maid Lou. She shook it so much, she had the German flu. No matter.
I kind of discovered this era that existed when before I really became conscious of music. That just like the Korean War is the kind of forgotten war in American history and American imagination, this era of music was kind of forgotten, this rhythm and blues era that goes between the swing era and what we now call rock and roll.
Women didn't like her.
And I kind of got fascinated with what it must have been like for the players themselves when that solid body electric guitar with the amplifier that went with it showed up. And realized in my listening and really kind of doing an extensive look at what were the hit songs from about 1950 up to 56, that there was a little war between the guitar and the piano, and very quickly the honking saxophone was banished from the bandstand, and then the piano was eased out for quite a while until it came back as an electronic keyboard and could kind of compete in volume, but never really be the lead instrument anymore.
Ty, I'm gonna be a little late Saturday.
You'll need to come in if you don't wanna. I made other arrangements.
Other arrangements?
Try something new in here.
You can't do that.
Yes, he can. Yes, he can, darling. This is his place, and he can do whatever he wants. You'll know where to find me when you need me.
And that started me thinking about it, a character. This music comes from the Deep South. What else was happening in the Deep South in 1950? The Korean War was starting. President Truman had decided to integrate the combat forces for the first time. And the Army's fear about that, their reticence about that, was not so much what was going to happen on the base as it was most of their bases were in the Deep South, and what was going to happen when these guys went on leave and went into those little towns next to the bases. So all that just seemed like a rich era and rich, kind of milieu to set a story in. And I came up with this idea of a character who was a piano player who has a innate dislike for guitarists because he's killed one in a fight when he was a young man, and kind of distrust of that instrument in general that is exacerbated by the time that he's in, where the guitar is starting to come to the foreground and kind of threaten the livelihood of those piano players.
Which one of you is Mr. Pinetop?
We ain't hiring.